this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Darian Fenton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I don't think there's anything to be congratulating themselves about for that government when the time frame for the submissions on this bill was shortened. And when we're considering something as important as cutting workers' pay, the least the government could have done was give the normal period of time, not rush it through the Christmas period where people did not have the chance to make submissions. Needless to say, there were something more than 500 submissions, 531 actually, received on this bill, of which 522 were opposed. Only 9 were in favour. And the reason for that is this bill is going to put workers, young workers, back on the scrap heap of youth minimum wages.
Shame.
It's the economic failure of this government, and it's putting their failures squarely on the shoulders of our young people. This bill not only reinstates youth rates for 16 and 17-year-olds, but also 18 and 19-year-olds, something we haven't seen in New Zealand since last century. Rather than making bold plans to tackle the urgent crisis of youth unemployment, 27,000 under 20-year-olds are not in employment, education or training. The Prime Minister has once again demonstrated their contempt for young people and the fact that they have no ideas. This bill is based on the flawed idea that cutting wages is a way to grow jobs. It's a tried and failed policy of last century. Mr Speaker, we all know there's a problem. No one's denying that. There is a national crisis in youth unemployment, but we don't agree that cutting wages for 16 and 17-year-olds or 18 and 19-year-olds who've been on a benefit for 6 months will make the difference that is needed. Cutting wages and making workers easier to fire, as this government has been doing, hasn't created jobs in the past for young people, isn't creating jobs now. There are now 90,000 young people out of work, education and training. That's an increase of more than 10,000 in the last year alone. And that's shameful. And that's despite the fact that this government gets up every time they have the opportunity and boasts about the 90-day trial period. It's done nothing. It's done nothing to help youth unemployment. And I find it very astonishing, actually, Mr Speaker, that the government, at the time, the Prime Minister admits he could not live on the minimum wage of $13.50, soon to go up by a paltry 25 cents an hour. As he admits that, he's still, at the same time, expecting young people, young 16 to 19-year-olds, to live on something like $10.80 or $90 an hour. What young people need is hope. They need hope, the skills to succeed in the job market and achieve higher incomes and better jobs. Creating a high-skill, high-wage economy is the way to go about this, to give our kids hope for the future, not to cut pay. We all know that, the next generation of this country is hollowed out. Numbers of our kids are getting on the plane for Oz. Numbers are already saving their airfare for Australia because they know that even there where there's a youth minimum wage, it's going to be a lot higher than here. But this government doesn't listen. It didn't listen to the submitters, and they just blunder blindly on. What was interesting, Mr Speaker, during the submissions was even employers were less than enthusiastic about sub-minimum wages. In a survey done by Moby last year, they found that, to quote, a key theme arising from the quantitative interviews was a lack of incentive that reducing the cost of labour or wage rates was for employers in hiring staff or filling vacancies. In fact, only a small number of employers suggested reintroducing the youth minimum wage would improve their likelihood of employing 16 and 17-year-olds. So the employers are saying that they're not going to use this. So that it's going to fail in its aim of cutting youth unemployment. The Employers and Manufacturing Association, they were interesting. They told the Select Committee that cutting youth pay is not a silver bullet. And there needs to be a whole range of measures, of changes, rather than this single one-eyed approach. The fundamental question that goes to the heart of this bill, however, Mr Speaker, is it fair or right to pay workers less because of their age, to discriminate against them? The implication of this bill is that the work of younger workers is of lesser value than older workers, and it perpetuates its stereotype of young workers as being unreliable, incapable, and it ignores the fact that many young workers already have had considerable work experience at the age of 16. So many people who support youth rates say that young workers need more training and support when they start a new job. But that same logic applies to anyone that starts a new job. And there was a time in this country, Mr Speaker, when people said the same about women, and indeed Māori. They said they were worth less because they were women and because they were Māori. And in fact, up until the early 1970s, women were paid less in the minimum wage than men. In the early 20th century, Māori were paid less than other workers. No one today would imagine tolerating that type of discrimination, but here we have a bill that perpetuates discrimination on the basis of age. We can't discriminate against older people. We can't discriminate people on the basis of being older. Some argue that older workers are less productive, yet there's no age-based minimum wage for them. As I said at the beginning, Mr Speaker, this bill will not achieve its aim. It will not deliver on its stated aims of reducing youth unemployment. The regulatory impact statement, which was very interesting, said that the precise nature and extent of the policy's expected outcomes are uncertain. All Moby could do was guess, and their best guess is that this bill will only create 400 to 1,100 net new jobs, and even if true, and that's taking into account the displacement that will occur for older workers, this is only a drop in the bucket compared to the 250,000 16 to 19-year-olds in New Zealand. And even those figures have to be treated with extreme caution. Moby said they can't project the impact of the policy. They cannot tell us that this policy will work. And they cannot do it with any accuracy, and they were quite explicit that it didn't have the information they needed to make a credible estimate. So despite the Minister claiming that youth rates are voluntary and that workers don't have to accept sub-minimum wages under this bill, if they don't accept it, these are 18 and 19-year-olds who have been on a benefit. And let's remember, we're not just talking about unemployment benefit here, we're talking about sickness and invalids benefits. If they do not accept a job and WINS judges that to have been a suitable job, they have to be stood down. They can be stood down from any support from WINS for 13 weeks. So poor young worker gets out of bed, having been sick or having been injured, gets out of bed, manages to apply for a job, and then they find...
Member, no, I'm on my feet. Just this interjections across the benches is unacceptable. I want to hear what the member is saying, and if there are interjections, they should be on what the Speaker is saying and not this other dialogue that's going on. Darian Fenton.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And as I was saying, the poor young worker who drags themselves out of bed, having been on the sickness benefit, invalid's benefit, has to accept a job at sub-minimum wages, or they will be stood down with nothing from WINS for 13 weeks. What's fair about that? Cutting young people's pay is just the tip of the iceberg of this government, because of course we know changes to labour laws are on their way, including meals and rest breaks. Yes, you bet they are. Because I was hoping the minister would show some sense, unlike his predecessor, because that's a stupid bill. But this is all going to hit Kiwi workers across the board, but this bill in particular is going to hit young workers. It's going to make it really much more difficult for them to survive. It's not going to make it easier for them to get work. The Minister's own department could not verify that the aim of this bill of cutting youth wages would deliver. And so it's a bill that just goes back to the tradition of the National Party, back to the 1990s. Let's cut people's pay. Let's cut people's pay. It doesn't work. It didn't work then, and it won't work now.
I call the Honourable John Banks.
Address just what the